The realization struck Harold like a comet. Maria was the woman's daughter. Despite having only met her mother once, he suddenly found himself insatiably interested in what had become of her. Attempting to maintain his calm exterior, he took a long sip of wine. "Your father's circumstances must be difficult for the family. How is your mother taking it?" "Unfortunately, she passed away last year," Nancy responded, her voice tinged with melancholy. "They divorced when I was young, and she'd been sick for some time." Harold's heart clenched at the news, causing a lull in the conversation until Nancy redirected it. "Can I ask you a question? Why is only the head of the Williams family here? Where's their younger generation?" Harold shrugged. "They keep to themselves more than the other families, and they've been expanding their overseas markets recently, so the rumor is that they've started to think outside the box when it comes to succession." "They've already decided on a successor? Arthur still seems fairly young. Is it his son?" "His oldest. I've met him a few times. He's around Jonathan and Xavier's age. Calm, composed, excellent leadership qualities. His name slips my mind. Oh, that's right. It's Oliver." Nancy struggled to contain a gasp. She had practically grown up with Oliver, and now he was next in line to inherit a massive fortune. What about Dan and Esther? Composing herself, Nancy asked another question. "Has Arthur always lived here?" "It's funny. I have a friend with the same last name who has an Uncle Arthur, but he died in a plane crash 20 years ago. I heard once that he grew up in Houston, and his father brought him here after he got his education. But who knows? It's all rumors." Her heart pounding in her chest, Nancy gave Harold a warm smile. "I'm sorry. Seem to have bombarded you with questions." "It's not a problem. It's your first time here, and this new place can be complex. It's good for you to know what you're dealing with." "I won't forget your kindness, Harold. If we can ever help you, please let me know." They clinked glasses and Harold stood to leave. "Likewise, Maria. And tell Jonathan to keep his phone close. I'll arrange a time for you two to come see Xavier, but it might require you to move fast." As Harold stepped away, Nancy steadied herself from falling over. She'd just learned that Esther's uncle had faked his own death to move to Havana and cut out Esther's father from the family fortune. Then, he'd left Esther's parents to raise Oliver and Dan on their own, before coming back to claim them when it best suited him. Not only did it explain Oliver's estrangement over the last few years, but it also explained the eagle tattoo that Nancy and Esther had seen in her basement. The Williams family in Cuba had set their plans into motion years before they played out. Just then, her train of thought was derailed by the appearance of Alexander. He sat down next to her and looked intensely into her eyes. "I have to say, it's bold of Jonathan to leave his muse sitting here all alone. If you were with me, I'd never leave your side." Alexander poured a glass of wine for both of them. "Welcome to Cuba." Nancy pointedly set her glass down without taking a sip. "Thank you for the warm welcome. And don't worry, Jonathan gives me everything I need." Alexander finished his glass and poured another, leaning in so close that Nancy instinctively scooted back. "I'm planning a little competition with some friends at an airfield south of the city tomorrow. What do you say, Maria? Care to join?" "What kind of competition exactly?" "Skydiving, horse racing, who knows?" Nancy offered a playful smile. "I've never skydived before." "No problem. I'll show you the ropes." Alexander's grin hinted at something more. "Trust me, that first time you jump, you experience a thrill like no other." Nancy held her silence, and Alexander didn't push for a response. His gaze lingered on her, and his voice dropped to a soft murmur. "You look stunning in that dress. I look forward to seeing what outfit you choose tomorrow." With that, he rose and left with a lingering smile. When he finally turned his back, Nancy poured herself a fresh glass of wine and chugged it. His attention gave her a creeping sense of unease, like a snake coiling around its prey. Before long, the band finished its last song and the banquet began to wind down. Just as Mackenzie prepared to leave with her uncle, a voice rang out. "Miss Sloane, may I have a word? In private." She turned to see Jonathan's cousin Theo approaching. Caught off guard, she nonetheless nodded and followed him outside. Wandering deep into the garden, Theo stopped to listen for anyone nearby before leveling a look at Mackenzie. "I'm not going to beat around the bush. We all saw what happened today. Why not align with us?" Mackenzie arched an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, Theo. I'm afraid I don't know what you mean, and I don't wish to meddle in your family's affairs, so—" Mackenzie turned to leave, but Theo grabbed her arm, closing the distance between them. "You know exactly what I mean, Miss Sloane. I was born and raised here. I know how things work. I have a clear advantage over outsiders like Jonathan." Mackenzie deftly sidestepped him. "If your advantage is so apparent, then why recruit me?" His expression tightened at her icy retort. "Because we both know the alternative. An alliance between the Davidsons and Sloanes is coming whether we like it or not. And all we can decide is how well-positioned we are when it does. Then again, you could always pick that idiot Dorian." That night, Nancy and Jonathan stayed in the opulent guest suite of the Davidson estate. Their private courtyard provided a facade of peace, but they remained on high alert. Norman and their 2 bodyguards occupied the ground floor on rotating shifts, and a quick scan upon arrival revealed multiple hidden cameras and listening devices. Examining the network, Nancy felt a spark of mischief. She borrowed Jonathan's computer, quickly wrote a backdoor program, and tapped into the sophisticated surveillance system. When she finished her meddling, she looked up at Jonathan and bounced her eyebrows. "Care to see a sneak peek of what they'll see when they check the recordings?" Jonathan chuckled. "By all means." Nancy turned the screen to face him, and their room was in view as normal, with Jonathan and Nancy lying in bed next to each other. After a moment, their faces were suddenly replaced by Matthew and Arthur's. Jonathan couldn't help but laugh out loud. "Remind me to never get on your bad side." Nancy flashed a wink. "Don't worry. I only use my powers for good." Jonathan turned toward her, the glint in his eye growing more intense. "Well, now that the cameras are taken care of, I have a few other ideas I'd like to explore." Nancy wriggled in his arms. "You remember we aren't on our honeymoon, right? We're in a hostile country surrounded by enemies? And what better way to stick it to them than enjoy ourselves in spite of it all?" Nancy's response was cut short, a stunned expression on her face. Before she could find the words, he had rolled on top of her and enveloped her in a passionate kiss. His powerful embrace quickly overpowered her senses, and she surrendered to the moment, fervently peeling off his clothes. By the time they were finished, the bedsheets were in shambles, and they both panted for breath. Snuggling into his arms, Nancy suddenly recalled the information Harold had shared with her and relayed it to Jonathan. He considered it for a moment, then twirled a lock of her hair around his finger, peering down at her. "Maria, have you noticed how similar you are to Xavier's uncle?" "Similar how? It just seems nice, good-hearted." "I mean your appearance. I noticed it right away, and the more I looked, the more apparent it was." Nancy pulled back and locked eyes with him. "Really? Think about it. He just happened to visit New York one time and seemed so interested in Maria's parents, especially her mother. Don't you think it's possible he knows something, or even had some kind of relationship with Melanie?" Nancy's heart pounded at his words. "You don't mean—" "Does it seem so crazy?" Nancy's mouth fell open. It was true that she'd felt a bond with Harold from the start, and he clearly saw something he recognized in her. Could it be a familial connection? Could it be that Chris wasn't her father at all? She turned back to Jonathan with wide eyes. "What should we do? Should we try to get a DNA sample? If I had it my way, you would never have to come back to this place again. But Maria deserves to know her roots. If she were still alive, she'd want to know who her real father was. Nancy nodded in agreement. Chris was so cruel to her, and through it all she wanted was the love of her parents. Leave it to me. I'll find a way to get a sample from Harold. The following day, Jonathan woke up early to get a head start on the day. He was far from convinced that Matthew wasn't involved in Arthur's appearance the previous night. And given his clear desire for Jonathan to be with Mackenzie, Jonathan couldn't assume that he wouldn't go to drastic lengths to get rid of Nancy. Taking her to the skydiving outing carried clear risks, but leaving her at home felt even more unsettling. By the time she woke up, he had made up his mind and communicated it to Norman. As they prepared to leave, he pulled Nancy aside and pushed a gun into her hand. I've thought about this from every angle, and I'm positive this little skydiving day is a setup. A plausible way to get one or both of us out of the picture without drawing scrutiny. So stay vigilant, and never let your guard down. Nancy nodded, and they climbed into the car, briskly descending the mountain roads before traveling south into a swarm of verdant, rolling hills. Soon enough, they arrived at a small airfield surrounded by barbed wire. The Davidsons had already arrived, and Alexander was the first to greet them. Not too shabby, right? My friends keep off his private jets here, but he lets me use them for skydiving whenever I want. Just then, Dorian hurried from the other car, a helmet perched awkwardly on his head. He was about to greet Nancy, but halted when he spotted Jonathan, nervously waving at them instead. There's a horse stable on the property too, and plenty of ATVs, so we can start wherever you want. After all, you're our honored guests. As they walked toward the center, a man and a woman approached on horseback. The man was tall, lean, and serious, and the woman was striking in her bright red riding clothes. Nancy instantly recognized the woman. It was Mackenzie. As they dismounted, Alexander introduced them. Obviously, you've both met Mackenzie, and this is her older brother, Gavin. Gavin jumped off his horse and shook Jonathan's hand, his warm smile propping up ice-cold eyes. I'm sorry I missed your big welcome party last night. If Alexander doesn't kill us today, let's make up for it with some drinks later. As they headed for the hangar, Nancy looked around and saw a group of instructors briefing a new student while a parachute descended from above. Nancy watched the man float safely to the ground, but as he climbed out of the parachute and unbuckled his harness, Nancy felt her heart leap into her throat. It was Oliver. Helmet in one hand and gear in the other, Oliver walked up to Alexander and wrapped him in a hug. Alex, what brings you here? Oliver, meet my long-lost cousin Jonathan and his little muse, Maria. Jonathan, this is Oliver, the future head of the Williams family. Jonathan met Oliver's gaze, and their eyes lit up with hatred. But after a moment of tension, both men offered cordial smiles and a handshake. Standing next to Jonathan, only Nancy understood the silent power play unfolding between them. This is Oliver's airbase, Alexander added. Jonathan and his muse are looking to have some fun, so I thought we'd shove them out of a plane. What do you think? My pleasure. Follow me to get your shoes, and listen closely when I explain the rules. I'd hate for anyone to have an accident. Nancy and Jonathan followed Xavier to the hangar, where a coach approached to brief them on the safety protocols. To Nancy's surprise, Jonathan waved him off. Thanks, but I've got this. I'll be her instructor. After a quick check of the gear, they boarded the plane and began their ascent. Nancy's heart pounded as they neared their target altitude, and Jonathan helped her into her gear. Sensing her panic, he pulled her close, his breath tickling her ear. Do you know that's only a few miles from here? The propellers droned loudly, forcing Nancy to practically press her lips against Jonathan's ears. No idea. Something important? Arthur's compound, the Williams family headquarters. Sensing a suggestive lilt in Jonathan's voice, Nancy swiveled to respond when suddenly the plane shuddered. They both turned just in time to see the pilot buckle his parachute and dive out of the plane. Maria, grab onto the handrail. Jonathan darted toward the cockpit, but his eyes went wide when he saw the state of the instruments. The pilot had buried a fire axe into the control panel and sparks sprayed out wildly. Ripping the axe from the dashboard, Jonathan frantically set about trying to repair the damage. A few feet behind him, Nancy stood frozen in silence, her gaze transfixed on the rapidly nearing ground. She watched as the pilot descended at an alarming rate, falling like a stone as his parachute stubbornly refused to open. From this altitude, his death was certain. Suddenly realizing the implication, she rushed to the cockpit. Jonathan, the pilot's chute didn't deploy. Do you think they've been sabotaged? But he didn't reply, his brows furrowed with concentration. She saw an unfamiliar nervousness in his intense concentration, and knowing better than to distract him, she stood by, ready to yank him toward the parachutes. Despite Jonathan's frantic adjustments, the plane kept falling. His knuckles turned white around the joystick, veins popping in stress, as alarm bells screamed all around them. On the ground, Oliver was leisurely riding a horse when he heard hoofbeats behind him. He glanced over his shoulder to see Mackenzie pulling up alongside, and his eyes remained stoic as he acknowledged her with a nod. Mackenzie, is everything all right? Are you lost? Not at all. I was actually hoping to get a moment alone together. You know, I have a couple of tickets to a concert tomorrow night. Would you like to go? Sorry, this week isn't good for me. It seems you're always busy these days. Don't you ever take a night off? Oliver spotted the faltering aircraft in the sky and narrowed his eyes, but quickly returned to the subject at hand. Is there a point you're trying to make, Miss Sloane? Are you really going to make me say it out loud? I've been by your side for 8 years, doing everything I can think of to show you how I feel about you. Her eyes shone with unspoken feelings. I used to think you had a heart of stone, but even a stone would have warmed me by now. Oliver's demeanor turned from polite to frosty. With all due respect, I don't owe you anything. Oliver, I tell you I have feelings for you and that's how you respond? Think of our families. Your family is not my concern, and the way I manage mine shouldn't be yours either. Just then, Oliver's phone buzzed. Seeing Esther's name on the screen, he spurred his horse into a gallop, leaving a stunned Mackenzie in his wake. Having distanced himself from Mackenzie, Oliver answered the incoming call, his voice starkly contrasting the cold tone he had previously employed with her. Esther, are you okay? It's Dan. He can't bear it any longer. He wants to move forward with the operation. I see. Is he with you? He's in the next room. I slipped away to call you so he wouldn't overhear. I know he's panicked about his career, but we're talking about life and death here. You're the only one he'll listen to. Just tell him to hold off until I get there. I'll charter a flight back immediately. Expect me home tonight. Okay. Thank you, Oliver. No sooner had he ended the call than Mackenzie came rushing up yet again. A smile graced her lips, but her eyes held a fiery spark. Is this why you turned me down? Is there someone else in your heart? Oliver looked at her with indifference and turned his horse around to depart, but with surprising agility, Mackenzie jumped onto the horse behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist and her body pressing against his back. She whispered into his ear, I want you, Oliver, and I don't believe you don't feel the same way. Taken aback, Oliver turned to face her, but Mackenzie took advantage of his momentary shock and yanked him into a kiss. Her trembling body radiated warmth that seeped into him with each rise and fall of her breath. Her mind spinning, Mackenzie spared a final glance at the tumbling plane, now dangerously close to the ground, In less than 10 seconds, it would meet its fate. Her thoughts drifted to Jonathan, the man who had scorned her so publicly the night before. He was like Oliver, proud, dangerous, irresistible. That's what made him the ultimate leverage in her campaign to seduce Oliver. She sabotaged every parachute on the plane to ensure his destruction, and felt certain that it would finally prove her uselessness to the man she truly loved, the man she was finally kissing for the first time. Under the clear sky, astride a horse, against the backdrop of impending doom she had single-handedly orchestrated, the thrill consumed her entirely. But just as Mackenzie attempted to deepen the kiss, she felt a firm grip on her shoulder. Suddenly, Oliver pushed her away, leaving her stunned. She looked up at him, and his icy eyes flashed with a lethal threat and made her blood run cold. It dawned on her then that he hadn't reciprocated her kiss. "Oliver, get out of my sight." His voice trembled with restrained fury, his pupils shrinking to needle-thin slits. Pain erupted in Mackenzie's palm as her nails dug into her flesh. "But why?" He leaned into her ear, each word hitting her like a hammer. "Because I don't love you, and I never will." A cold shock ran down Mackenzie's spine. Sure, she had sensed Oliver's indifference, but she was Mackenzie Sloane. Her lineage, beauty, and intellect made her the ultimate prize. How could he not see that? But the words had come straight from him. It was clear he had someone else in his life. She had seen the warmth in his eyes, the gentleness in his voice while he was on the phone. It was a side of Oliver Williams she had never witnessed. A surge of jealousy and anxiety welled up in her chest. Desperate, she clung to his arm. "Tell me who she is. At least let me know who I've lost to." "I don't owe you an explanation," Oliver scoffed. He took her hand off with such force that she lost balance, teetering backward. "Oliver, help!" But before she could finish her plea, she went tumbling off the back of the horse. Oliver made no move to catch her, and Mackenzie hit the ground with a hollow thud, the fall leaving her winded and speechless. Without another glance, he snapped the reins and spurred his horse into a gallop, quickly vanishing from sight. Oliver raced toward the landing pad, his mind a fortress against today's events. If a death occurred on his property, as long as he didn't pull the trigger, he only needed to answer for lack of security. Besides, Matthew's character was no secret to him after all these years. He would undoubtedly stew in anger over Jonathan's death, but he wouldn't risk the family business over a vendetta. The Williams family would sacrifice some profits as compensation, but it was a small price to pay for removing a thorny problem. But as he rode, a feeling of unease swept over him. The plane had looked destined to crash, but there was no plume of smoke, no distant rumble. Observing the eerie calm, he hastened his pace, eventually bumping into an equally concerned Alexander. "I saw a plane go down just now. What happened, Alexander?" "I'm not sure. I've sent a team to investigate." "You realize what we'll be dealing with if your little scheme failed, don't you? A man like Jonathan only gives you an open shot once. If you decide to take it, you damn sure better not miss." As Jonathan and Nancy careened to the ground, he pulled her into his arms, and the whirlwind of their romance swirled in his mind. It felt like he'd known Maria for half his life, but in reality, it had been less than a year. He looked at her with grim certainty. "The parachutes are useless, aren't they?" She nodded, and he mentally kicked himself for underestimating the cutthroat nature of their adversaries. To them, gains were everything. Human lives were nothing. Grasping Nancy close, he secured their seatbelts, his voice thick with emotion. "I love you, Maria." As he locked eyes with her for what he feared might be the final time, Jonathan felt an inexplicable calm wash over him. He inhaled her familiar scent, felt the steady rhythm of her heart, and kissed her gently. As the plane's rapid descent continued, Jonathan's hands danced over the control panel, desperate to wrestle the aircraft back under control. The alarm bells had escalated into an urgent wail, and with the ground less than 100 feet away, Jonathan made one last attempt. Summoning all of his strength, he planted his feet on the control panel and yanked back on the joystick. Every muscle in his body contracted, and he let out a ferocious shout. Then, just as his eyes shut and prepared for the end, he felt the flaps give way, and the plane abruptly flattened. Coming within inches of their fiery demise, the plane swerved back up into the air, engines roaring under the strain. As the aircraft stabilized, Jonathan looked over at Nancy, and she stared back at him with teary, grateful eyes. "We've got one more stop, Maria." "What? Where?" He looked at her with a wild, murderous expression, and her eyes went wide with recognition. "Arthur's compound." He nodded fiercely, and she promptly handed over her pistol. "Let's do it." At that moment, Arthur was enjoying a drink outside before his afternoon swim. The sound of the distant aircraft engine caught his ear, and he narrowed his eyes, glancing at the nearby helipad where his personal chopper sat quietly. He turned to his aide with an irritated tone. "Did you forget to tell me someone was paying us a visit this afternoon?" "Of course not. Whoever that is, they didn't bother to tell us." They both turned and squinted at the sky, watching as the airplane slowly took shape in front of them. "It looks like it's one of Oliver's planes, sir. Should I get someone out to the landing strip?" "Hold on." Arthur felt his heart rate pick up as the plane continued its approach at alarming speed. It was clearly not preparing to land. "Sir, I don't think that's Oliver." Just then, a figure appeared out of the window of the plane's cockpit. The rapid sound of gunfire split the air, and Arthur's assistant dove in front of him. Bullets tore into his chest, and as the plane roared past, his lifeless body slumped on top of Arthur's, a pool of blood rapidly spreading out beneath them. As soon as Jonathan's first gunshot echoed out, the shadows of the Williams estate sprung into action. A volley of returned fire erupted, but the bullets pinged harmlessly off the plane's hull. Jonathan jerked up on the stick to steer away from the compound, and the last thing he saw was Arthur being hustled inside, the extent of his injuries unclear. Jonathan's pulse slowly returned to normal as he directed the plane towards the Davison estate. Ultimately, Arthur's fate was immaterial to him. Dead or alive, this was about more than personal vendettas, and Jonathan had made it clear what happens when his life was threatened. By the time he landed the plane on Matthew's airstrip, Nancy was shaking with exhilaration. Jonathan chuckled as he looked her up and down. "Are you okay? Were you scared?" Nancy smiled, her gaze tracing his tall silhouette. "Honestly, no. I'm just glad we finally confronted him after all the pain he's caused us. My parents, your brothers, they all deserve justice." He brushed her cheek with a kiss and stepped down from the plane before circling to her side and lifting her out. He started carrying her toward the main house, but she swatted at him and wriggled in his grasp. "Put me down. I'm not some damsel in distress." "I know, darling. But the more we paint ourselves as the victims here, the more likely we are to keep Matthew's support. We have enough enemies out here. The last thing we need is one of them turning his head." Nancy rolled her eyes. "Fine, I'll play along." Jonathan bored Nancy through the main entrance, where they came across Matthew as he got off the phone with Alexander. Hanging up, he leveled a curious look at Jonathan. "What happened? Is Maria okay?" "Just frightened. Our plane lost control and the pilot left us behind with broken parachutes. It was a close call." Matthew nodded as he listened, his expression giving nothing away. "I'm glad you're back safe. I always tell Alexander that skydiving is no way for him to spend his free time, but he never listens. I just got a call from one of my assistants about some trouble over at Arthur's place. Do you know anything about that?" Jonathan flashed his eyebrows. "That depends, Uncle. Do you want the truth or a comforting lie you can repeat to your friends?" Matthew laughed. "Why don't you give me both?" "Well, if you ask me, Arthur's security was clearly lacking, and the attack came from a Williams family plane, so the whole thing reeks of an inside job. Makes you wonder how much control he really had. Or at least that's how it would look to shareholders." Nancy bit her lip to stifle a laugh, thinking how inappropriate the setting was. Matthew hummed at Jonathan's candor and got straight to the point. "Arthur might be gone, but he's left a legacy. A son. If you aim to absorb the Williams empire, I'd be impressed. But leaving a trail of grudges is dangerous. It's like trimming the leaves, but ignoring the roots." Jonathan's gaze sharpened. "Don't worry, I can handle the roots. The point is that the Williams family won't be content until they're in undisputed control. They came for me today, but there's no reason to think they won't come for you or the others tomorrow." Matthew sighed. "You remind me of my younger self, fighting tooth and nail for every dollar, every scrap of land. The difference is, I was defending what we already had. Expansion is far riskier. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. But if you don't believe me, then let's place a wager." Matthew narrowed his eyes. "What are the terms?" "You keep pursuing your strategy, and I'll pursue mine. I'll act entirely independent of you and your family. I just need a guarantee of safety when I'm here." "And what's in it for me?" "If I fail, you can throw me under the bus and look all the more loyal to your business partners. If I succeed, the Williams empire will be yours." Jonathan grinned. "Besides, what kind of Davis man can resist a good bet? In that case, you have a deal." He reached out his hand, and Jonathan shook it. "But be careful, Jonathan. Not everything here is as it seems, and alliances go in and out like the tides in Havana Bay." Jonathan nodded and gently hugged Nancy closer. "Very well then. Maria had quite a shock, so I'll take her to rest." Once inside their room, Nancy broke into a sly smile. "How was my performance?" Jonathan ruffled her hair affectionately. "You might have a future in acting. I thought you had actually passed out there for a minute." I had to keep him laughing. "Matthew is smart, but I don't trust him. So the more he thinks we're beholden to him, the more he'll let his guard down." As he set her down on the bed, he locked eyes with her. "Do you think Arthur made it?" Nancy shook her head. "I'm not positive, but I could tell he was in bad shape. Even if he survives, I doubt he'll be the same. And regardless, his veil of invincibility has been punctured for good. Anyone who has ever wanted to take a shot at him will see their opportunity now. Well, he got what he deserved, and anyone else who threatens our family will get the same." At that very moment, Oliver was pacing anxiously outside the operating theater where Arthur's life hung in the balance. A bullet had lodged itself in his chest after passing through his bodyguard, and though it hadn't killed him outright, it had grazed his heart and put him in critical condition. Suddenly remembering his promise to Esther, Oliver pulled his phone out and called Dan, who quickly answered. "Hey, big bro." "How did you know it was me?" "Esther set up custom ringtones so I'd always know who was calling. She said you're coming back to New York today?" "Doing my best. I heard you've decided to go ahead with the surgery." "I have to try, Oliver." Dan's voice held a firm resolve. "Either I get my life back, or I don't wake up." There was a lengthy pause before Oliver finally responded. "If that's what you want, then I'll make it happen." "Really?" "It's your life, but if things go south, try being a little more practical on your next go-round." "What's that supposed to mean?" Oliver sighed. "Life is short, and we don't know what's on the other side. Dad was shot today, and he's in surgery." Dan scoffed. refusing Oliver's sentimental bait. Then he got what was coming. Call it what you want. If there's nothing else, I've got to go. Fine, Dan replied curtly. After an agonizing 6-hour wait, the surgeons finally emerged from the operating room with frayed nerves. Oliver rushed forward, locking eyes with the chief surgeon. How's my father? The surgeon hesitated. He's stable, but the bullet damaged his heart, which led to weakened blood flow to the brain. Oliver felt a sinking sensation. Meaning? He's in a coma, and brain scans suggest that it's unlikely he'll wake up. But miracles do happen. Oliver took a deep breath, steadying himself. What can we do in the meantime? Obviously, we'll do everything we can from a medical perspective, but from personal experience, I think you might want to try to find a way to stimulate him emotionally. Talk to him. Make sure he hears the voices of his loved ones. If anything is going to get through to him, it's that. After the doctors left, Oliver stood in the corridor outside Arthur's room, lost in thought as he pondered his next moves. Eventually, his phone buzzed and he saw it was his brother. Yeah, Dan? Dan hesitated. Is he gone? No, but nearly. If he doesn't regain consciousness, he's just trapped inside his own body. Impossible to know whether his brain is alive or dead. Dan chuckled bitterly. Imagine that. Him, of all people, ending up like this. Remember how invincible he seemed? We're still his sons, no matter what. And there's more to the past than you know. What do you mean? Oliver sighed. That accident when we were kids, it wasn't as simple as it was made out to be. He nearly died saving our lives. The line went silent for a moment as the weight of Oliver's words settled in. Really? How do you know that? Oliver sighed. Rehashing it won't change anything. He's in the ICU for the next 2 weeks before he gets transferred to a nursing home. If you still want to go ahead with your procedure, I can get the top specialists to fly in tomorrow. After a beat, Dan responded. All right, if he truly gave me this life, then if the surgery pans out, I'll do my best to honor him. The following day, Oliver chartered a plane to New York and arranged to meet with the city's leading neurosurgeon when he landed. As the plane took off and the Havana skyline began to shrink behind him, Oliver's mind wandered back to his childhood. He was only 13 when he learned that his father hadn't perished in the plane crash that caused him and Dan to end up with Esther's family. It turned out that he had faked his death to escape a powerful enemy and relocated to Cuba to start over. Oliver was initially overjoyed that his father had invited him to join his new family, but the sheer cold-bloodedness he witnessed in Arthur shook him to the core. It wasn't long before they had a major falling out, and Oliver had just decided to walk away for good, when Arthur made a chilling threat about Esther's family. He had nothing but love for the family that had taken him in, and was left with no choice but to stand by and do Arthur's bidding. In a blink, years rolled by. He'd been embroiled in countless disputes and feuds since then, and escaping the family business seemed increasingly impossible. Then, slowly but surely, he stopped wanting to. He had always felt that he had been manipulated into joining his father's ruthless pursuit of power. But with Arthur as good as dead, Oliver could no longer run from the truth. He wanted the power for himself. But unlike Arthur, he intended to use it to protect the people he loved, not to coerce them into lives of violence. With hands on the levers of power, he could make sure that Esther and her parents were never in danger again. As Oliver's plane sped toward New York, Esther received an unexpected call from Nancy. The moment she picked up, Nancy's voice came through with urgency. Esther, we've identified the puppet master. They nearly got to Jonathan and I yesterday, but we turned the tables. Who was it? Your uncle. His name is Arthur. It's possible he's dead, but we haven't been able to confirm." Esther gasped, pausing as she gathered her thoughts. "My uncle? I guess that explains some things." "There's more, Esther. He's been grooming an heir to replace him, and it's your brother. It's Oliver." "What? Are you sure it was him?" "I'm positive. He's running the family now, Esther. We don't have any reason to think he wants to harm you, but we can't be positive. There's a real possibility he's the one threatening Xavier. And your parents? Jonathan's brothers? We think that was Arthur's doing, but we're still looking into it. Just be careful, Esther. We'll be back as soon as we can get Xavier." "You too, Nancy." No sooner had Esther hung up the phone than she heard a knock on her door. Expecting a delivery that evening, she opened it without a second thought and pulled the package, placing it on her kitchen table. She retrieved a pair of scissors and was just about to slice open the box when she got a text message that made her heart skip a beat. It was from Oliver. "Just touched down in New York. Headed to meet the surgeons, and then I'll come by your apartment so we can eat together. Look forward to seeing you." With Nancy's warning echoing in her mind, Esther typed out a hesitant reply. "My place is a mess. Why don't you pick me up and we'll go somewhere more lively?" Returning her phone to her pocket, she retreated to the bathroom to get ready. When she suddenly sensed that something was wrong. A rivulet of black smoke was seeping under the bathroom door from her living room. She yanked the door open and stepped through, and the first thing she felt was the intense wall of heat. Turning toward it, her eyes went wide with horror. Her entire kitchen was engulfed in flames, and the package she just brought inside was at the center of the inferno. Within seconds, her apartment was thick with acrid smoke and the stench of burning wood. The dark veil of fumes swirled around her, stinging her eyes and lungs. She coughed violently, each breath feeling like inhaling needles. Seeing no way out, she rushed to the bathroom and soaked herself in the shower. But before she could even chalk out a plan, a thunderous explosion threw her against the opposite wall. A second explosion sent shards of mirror and bathroom tiles ricocheting in every direction, cutting her face and turning the floor into a minefield for her wet, bare feet. Just then, she heard the sharp tone of her phone ringing amid the roaring flames. Seeing Oliver's name flashing on the screen, Nancy's warning immediately sprung to mind. But she didn't have time to question him. She just needed help. With a shaky breath, she answered. "Oliver, are you there?" "Esther." Oliver's voice, usually so composed, quivered with raw emotion. "The whole building's on fire. Where are you?" Choking back her fears, Esther's voice was a hoarse whisper. "Someone sent an explosive package. I was the target. The entire place just went up. I'm stuck in the bathroom." A faint sound rose above the cacophony somewhere in the distance. Sirens wailing, voices shouting. But she clung to Oliver's voice like a life raft as he took charge of the situation. "Listen to me, Esther. Stay where you are and don't hang up. Just keep talking." "I don't have a way out. The front door is blocked and I can't get to the fire exit." "Get to the far corner of the bathroom, soak a towel, and wrap it around your face to help filter the smoke. Then crouch down low to avoid the smoke." Esther gasped, her voice ragged. I can't see." "You don't need to. Remember your yoga sessions? Visualize your movement. Breathe, deep and steady. Keep your pulse down." As she tried to recall the safety drills from her youth, the water pressure in the shower suddenly dropped, slowing to a dribble. Oliver leapt from his taxi in front of Esther's building, scanning the scene as residents fled the building in a mad panic. Driven by sheer determination, he pushed against it, only to have his path blocked by a firefighter. "Sir, hold back. There might be chemical explosives in there. You can't risk it." "I don't care. My best friend is up there." Seeing a hose snaking across the ground, Oliver drenched his clothes with water, grabbed a fire axe, and started toward the main entrance. Just as he stepped forward, Dan's voice reached him. "Oliver, is that you?" Esther is trapped! Floor 17, room 12. I'm on it. As he crashed into the building, he heard Esther's voice through the phone, noticeably weaker than moments before. Oliver, are you there? Hang in there. I'm close. The air grew denser as he charged up the stairwell, but he fought through the smoke until he reached the 17th floor, gasping for oxygen. His gaze locked on Esther's door, and he tried to kick it in, but it wouldn't budge. He managed to splinter the top of the door with the fire axe, but bright orange flames immediately shot through, blocking his path. Realizing he needed another route, he shouldered his way into Dan's apartment, sending a shower of embers into the air that seared his skin and left angry welts as they rained down around him. Spotting the balcony, Oliver ran outside and saw that the only thing separating him from Esther's balcony was a frosted glass partition and a 3-foot gap. He raised the axe above his head and shattered the partition with a resounding crash, then leapt onto Esther's balcony, tumbling onto the broken glass. Pain, sharp and immediate, shards dug into his palms, and he staggered to his feet. The severity of the situation hit him like a punch to the gut. Flames danced around him and roared overhead, their relentlessness mocking his cold desperation. Back inside, Esther tried to resist the siren call of unconsciousness, but every shallow breath felt like inhaling fire itself. Every second felt longer than the last, and as her vision blurred and a wall of dizziness hit her, a final thought pierced the haze. Please, don't let this be the end. Just then, a heavy thud echoed in the distance. It grew louder, turning into a persistent banging. Through the murkiness, a familiar sound emerged. Esther, where are you? Her heart leaped. Blinking rapidly, she squinted, trying to make out the shadow moving towards her amidst the smoke. Before she was even certain who it was, Oliver's arms were wrapped protectively around her, his strength grounding her against the chaos all around them. He studied her face, concern evident in his smoke-ridden eyes. Esther! His voice trembled with relief. God, are you okay? She coughed, her throat raw from smoke inhalation. Blinking rapidly to clear her vision, she rasped. Why are you here? It's too dangerous. His intense gaze held her momentarily, and she glimpsed an emotion she'd never seen from him before. It was raw vulnerability. His voice quivered as he held her close. After everything we've been through, you still have to ask? He shifted her slightly in his arms and brushed his singed hair from his face. His once pristine shirt was blackened and scorched, and his torso was speckled with blood. Every inch of him bore testament to what he endured to get to her. We can't get through your front door, so we need to go back out through the balcony. We don't have much time, so whatever happens, shield your eyes and do what I say, okay? Esther nodded as she clung to him. Tightening her grip around his neck, she suddenly noticed the sticky warmth seeping through his clothes, and her heart caught in her throat. Oh God, Oliver, you're bleeding! Cutting her off, Oliver fixed her with a firm gaze. We don't have time to debate. If we stay, we die. Taking a final deep breath, Oliver pushed back into the living room and dashed toward the balcony. As he fought through the debris, the distinctive blend of his scent and the sharp metallic smell of blood flooded Esther's brain. Through the dark haze, she felt the rhythmic beating of his heart, and a string of vivid memories suddenly washed over her. Growing up, Oliver had always been distant and unaffectionate, more like a mysterious classmate than a normal sibling. But no matter what his mood, he had always quietly provided for her. On hot summer days, he would appear with a cold glass of lemonade. On the coldest days of winter, he'd be there with a blanket. She would thank him, but he always met her gratitude with silence. Over the years, she'd accepted that he was just cold and aloof, but only now did she realize the lengths he'd always gone to ensure her health and happiness. Her thoughts swirled like the smoke around them until a sudden jolt pulled her back to reality. Oliver stumbled, and as his grip on her tightened, she felt his body tense, as though he'd been struck by something. "Oliver, talk to me. Are you all right?" She looked up at him and could see the flesh wound on his head from falling plaster, but his mouth was held tight with determination. "It was nothing. Just stay with me. If we can get back to Down's balcony, I can get you out of here." The closer they got to the balcony, the more Oliver's grip seemed to shake. Fear pricked at Esther as she realized that Oliver wasn't simply winded, he was hurt. Badly. Just as she was about to express her concern, she felt a rush of fresh air that told her they'd made it outside. She locked eyes with the firefighters on the next balcony over, and they slung a rope across the gap. Oliver wasted no time in securing it around Esther's waist, but as he knotted the rope and tested its strength, she locked eyes with him. "Oliver, tell me the truth. Are you the heir to the Williams family?" He hesitated momentarily, his azure eyes piercing through the thickening smoke. "Yes, it's true." She struggled to find her voice amidst the chaos. "But how? Why didn't you tell me? How deeply are you involved? I need to know." "It's not the time, Esther. Just trust me a little longer, and I promise I'll tell you everything you want to know. Now hold on." She barely had time to process his words before he gave her a mighty heave, sending her soaring across the void to the sanctuary of the neighboring balcony. As the waiting firemen pulled her to safety, an earth-shattering explosion sounded behind her, causing the entire building to shake. "Oliver!" she screamed, her heart in her throat. Cool, yet laden with emotion, his voice cut through the din. "It's all right, Esther. You're safe now." As she tore away the cloth protecting her face, her eyes locked onto the fiery abyss that was once her home. She looked for any sign of Oliver, but found none. As the firemen dragged her away, grief slowly strangled her, and her vision went dark. Back in Cuba, Nancy and Jonathan were enjoying a quiet evening alone when a message pinged on Nancy's phone. It was from Harold. "We're all set, Maria. You and Jonathan can come to meet Xavier tomorrow afternoon." Nancy showed it to Jonathan, and they exchanged a loaded glance. It was clear that members of both the Davidson family and the Williams family had tried to kill them since they had arrived, and now they were walking into a stronghold of yet another group that they had no reason to trust. After all, Jonathan had openly rebuffed Mackenzie, and his newfound prominence in the Davidson family was a threat to everyone. "What do you think, Maria? Is it a trap?" "I trust Harold, but he's not in charge. Hopefully they heard what happened to Arthur, and it will make them think twice before trying anything. Regardless, Xavier is our friend. We can't leave without him." Nancy nodded in agreement. "Good. Then whatever happens, we'll face it together." As dawn painted the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Nancy and Jonathan found themselves approaching the Sloane estate. An architectural marvel perched on the small island northwest of the city. As their car rumbled to a stop at a private dock, a gleaming speedboat awaited to ferry them across. When they reached the mansion, the imposing figure of Carter Sloane greeted them in the vast hall. Every inch the patriarch, he exuded a commanding presence and welcomed them with a stiff nod, as if to say, "You're here, but you aren't welcome." Finally, a stone-faced herald appeared and beckoned them toward Xavier's bedroom. Harold led Nancy and Jonathan through the grand manor, gesturing to the surroundings with a mix of pride and melancholy. "As you can see, our family has always been dedicated to health. It's tradition, really. It runs in our veins." Nancy narrowed her eyes. "Do you mean your blood is unique somehow?" Harold chuckled lightly. "Exactly. We're lucky that it's continued to be passed down after so many centuries. It's likely the only reason Xavier is still with us. Though we also owe a debt of gratitude to the Jung family." Nancy's pulse quickened, and she strained to contain her emotions at the sound of her ancestral family name. "What about the Jung family?" Harold raised an eyebrow. You're familiar with them. Their medical research changed countless lives in Eastern Europe before World War I. Generations of leaders retained them as their personal doctors, and they used these proceeds to fund programs for the poor. But proximity to power is a double-edged sword. Many a time it ends in tragedy. Sensing Nancy's growing distress, Jonathan interjected. What kind of tragedy, Harold? Harold sighed. Very little of this is written in records, but according to the stories, they were called to Hungary in the days before the First World War to help heal a young prince. They were unsuccessful through no fault of their own, but the king blamed them and mounted a ruthless campaign to not only destroy their family, but to erase their contribution from the historical record. Some went underground and are said to have escaped, but many more were brutally executed. The rest, I'm afraid, is lost to history. Nancy stumbled slightly as she listened to Harold's story, but Jonathan deftly supported her from behind. It seemed there was no end to the pain that her family had endured. When they finally reached Xavier's room, they found him resting in bed, a large wound still marring his abdomen. Seeing his friend in such critical condition, Jonathan rushed forward. Xavier, what happened? How are you? Xavier opened his eyes and regarded Jonathan with confusion, so Harold interjected. Xavier, this is Jonathan, your friend from New York that I told you about. Do you remember him? His gaze was distant and lost, and after a prolonged pause, he shook his head. I'm sorry. Don't worry, Xavier. These things take time. We are here for anything you need. Jonathan narrowed his eyes as he scrutinized his friend, looking for any sign that this might be an act. He knew better than to assume it was all as straightforward as it seemed. Meanwhile, in a secret room across the hall, Gavin sat before an array of monitors, watching the interaction between Jonathan and Xavier. He studied every nuance, every twitch of Xavier's face, but continued to come up frustratingly empty. Could he really have lost his memory? Gavin just couldn't accept it. Leading the Sloane family was his destiny, and he would seize it at any cost. Back inside, Nancy slid a plate of fruits toward Xavier, and Jonathan watched, heart in his throat, as he meticulously picked up a slice of peach and ate it. He then turned to Jonathan, and for the briefest of moments, locked eyes with him. Try a peach. They're better than they look. Xavier's tone was as casual as could be, but for Jonathan, the subtext was loud and clear. Xavier was okay. Containing his elation, Jonathan took a slice and responded as he chewed. After discussing it with Maria, we think it's best if you come back to New York with us. Our doctors agree that familiar people and places could be helpful in your recovery. Xavier nodded. Whatever you all think is best. Good. Then we'll begin arranging it with your grandfather right away. When Jonathan and Nancy arrived back at the Davidson residence later that night, he reached into his pocket and produced a few strands of hair. Nancy's eyes widened. When did you... Jonathan grinned. A little subterfuge while chatting with our dear Uncle Harold. We'll test it as soon as we're back in New York. But do you really think they'll let us take Xavier without a fight? If Carter Sloane truly cares about his family, he'd do what's best for Xavier. And if he doesn't, then he won't care what happens to him anyway. I suspect he's not as ill as he seems. But if they believe he truly has no memory, then he doesn't even have value as a bargaining chip. To Jonathan's satisfaction, his predictions soon proved accurate. A call from Harold a few hours later confirmed Carter's agreement. Xavier would be able to go home with them in a matter of days. With their return to New York looming, one unresolved matter still tugged at Jonathan's mind. He felt no closer to the medicine that Ashley so desperately needed, and he couldn't ignore the facts in front of him. While the Davis men suffered and died one after the other, the Davidson family remained unscathed. There had to be a cure, and it had to be in Cuba somewhere. With no clear leads and limited resources in the country, Jonathan sought out Matthew's study one quiet afternoon. The older man sat engrossed in his books, an aura of authority radiating from him. Jonathan hesitated at the door. "Uncle, may I have a moment?" Matthew looked up, his gaze piercing. He signaled toward an adjoining chair and asked his assistant to fetch him a cigar. Once lit, a plume of blue smoke spiraled upwards. "What is it, Jonathan?" Jonathan gathered his thoughts. "Something has been gnawing at me. Why did all of my brothers fall victim to a disease that never touched you, or your nephews here?" Matthew took a deep drag from his cigar. "From what I understand, your concerns are moot. You've been cured, and Steve's generation has finally shed the gene." Jonathan leaned forward, determination etched on his face. "That's not the point. The connections between the Jung, Reynolds, Davidson, Williams, and Sloan families. I know there's something I'm not being told, and I know it's resulted in the deaths of my brothers." Matthew sighed, the weight of history heavy in his eyes. The Jung family wasn't the only one forced to go underground, to flee. The Davidsons were their closest allies and got swept up in the same purges. We were lucky to find our way here and remained as intact as we have. Then the Williams family. Were they? Correct. The Williams are the descendants of the family that persecuted us. Their empire was already on its dying breath when they turned on us and the Jungs. And before long, they found themselves crossing oceans and reinventing themselves just the same. It was only through sheer chance that we all saw the opportunity here in Cuba after the Second World War. But the Williams never let go of their anger. To this day, they blame us and the Jungs for the collapse of their empire. Are they right? Did we have a hand in it? Matthew observed him, slowly exhaling as a wry grin crossed his face. We might have. Not that they can prove it. Jonathan sat back in his chair, stunned by the magnitude of history that had just been laid out in front of him. So all the families coalesced here, hoping to use their financial power to pay off a weak government and remain above the law. But with so little room for error, internal feuds would have meant certain death. Our only choice was to bury the hatchet. That explains why the Williams attacked my family and the Johnsons instead. But how did they even discern our identities? There's always a way, and it took them decades. But I have to admit, I've long suspected that our family might have played a hand in it. We might have sacrificed the Davis and Johnson families to deflect attention and maintain the peace at home. Jonathan's eyes widened with a heady mix of anger and disbelief. So because we live in a different country, our lives mean nothing? Our shared history is worth less than a few land deals? That's exactly the kind of betrayal that got us into this mess in the first place. I know. That's why I'm telling you now. Jonathan took a breath to calm himself, refocusing on the reason he was there. Ashley's medicine. So in the absence of the Jungs, how did you continue to treat our family's blood disorder? The Reynolds. Their ancestors studied under the Jungs in the early years of our alliance. And as you know, they retained the ability to produce the medicine we needed. Unfortunately, the materials required are extremely hard and difficult to source. Much of our wealth has been spent on it at black market auctions over the years. There are auctions? You mean I could just go out and buy it? Not quite. These auctions aren't open to just anyone, and the people who run them are extremely powerful. You need a ticket, and that, my boy, requires special access of its own. Jonathan leaned forward. I'll get access. Just tell me where the auction is. They announce the time and location right before it takes place. Call this phone number and leave your name, nothing else. If you're approved for the auction, they'll get in touch. The next one should be coming up in a month or two. He scribbled the numbers down on a scrap of paper and handed it to Jonathan, who accepted it with a forced smile. Thank you, Uncle. I appreciate this. Matthew studied Jonathan for a moment. Despite our family's differences, I've always respected you. You remind me of myself. But you cling too much to sentimentality. The road to the top is paved with dead bodies, Jonathan. Sometimes, that means leaving behind a person we love. Jonathan's face remained impassive. As far as I'm concerned, there are two kinds of people. Those who are dear to me, and everyone else. I'm not a benevolent person. I'm not a patient person. But I will always shield my own, whether they share my blood or not. Matthew raised an eyebrow. So you plan to interfere with the Sloan family? It's already in motion. Don't tell me you forgot our little bet, Uncle. Of course not, but your decisions still impact me. I hope you'll remain an open line of communication while we see how things play out. Jonathan nodded, pointedly avoiding a verbal commitment. Matthew smirked in response, tapping ash from his cigar. Should you fall prey to your own ambition, our doors will remain open to you, Jonathan. With a defiant glint in his eye, Jonathan stood and buttoned his suit coat. Much obliged, Uncle, but there won't be any need for that. With a final, charged look, Jonathan spun on his heels and walked out of the library. The next morning, Nancy and Jonathan rose with the sun and made their way to the front of the compound, their bags laid neatly beside them. It was time to go back to New York. A sleek car pulled up, signaling Xavier's arrival, but as Jonathan reached out to greet him, the door swung open unexpectedly. Dorian stepped out with a cheeky grin plastered on his face, causing Nancy to recoil. She quickly sought refuge, wrapping herself in Jonathan's embrace. Jonathan narrowed his eyes. Dorian, what brings you here? Thought I'd see the Big Apple. Never been, you know. Maybe you could show me around. Jonathan assessed him, trying to discern his true intent. Ironically, Dorian's lack of seriousness made him less of a threat than Jonathan's other cousins, but he still thought it best to maintain a cautious distance. We have our own plans back home. Businesses to run, families to tend to. This isn't a vacation. Undeterred, Dorian flashed his passport. Don't worry, I won't hold you back. I already got my visa and the thumbs up from old man Matthew. Jonathan rubbed his temples in frustration, but saw no way out. Fine, but take the car with Xavier. Maria and I need to talk. A vicious smirk appeared on Dorian's face as he moved toward Xavier's vehicle. Nancy looked at Jonathan with concern, but he shrugged. I don't like it any more than you do, but it might be good to keep him close. With Dorian around, our enemies down here might think twice before trying anything. The convoy made its way to the airport, but no sooner had they pulled their bags from the cars than an unexpected obstacle appeared. It was Gavin, Xavier's cousin, and he was flanked by two enforcers. Jonathan glanced at Xavier as he clenched his fists, but before he could intervene, Gavin spoke up with mock concern. Sorry to interrupt, but Grandpa's been calling out for you all morning, Xavier. We're not sure what happened, but his health has suddenly taken a turn. Jonathan's heart raced, sensing the danger lurking beneath Gavin's words as he continued. He seemed so heartbroken when he heard you were leaving. I'm worried that's what caused his illness. Why don't you come back and see him? And once he's better, I'll fly you to New York myself. Jonathan's mind raced as he weighed the options. They could reject Gavin and leave, but it could easily lead to a break between Xavier and Carter and create more danger for him in the long run. Seeing Jonathan struggle, Xavier stepped forward, his voice firm. I'll go back, Gavin, for Grandpa. Then he turned to Jonathan, pulling him into a brief hug. I have to face him. If I don't do it now, he could consolidate more power. Are you sure about this? Xavier pulled back and met his gaze. Better to meet danger head-on than to live in its shadow. With a firm nod, Jonathan turned to his bodyguards. Both of you, stay here with Xavier. He's your only priority." Xavier and the bodyguard slid into Gavin's car, and moments later, they disappeared into traffic. When they were finally in the air, Nancy sent a message to explain the situation to Esther and promised they would do everything to keep Xavier safe. The response she received made her jaw drop. "It's okay, Nancy. I'm headed to Havana with Dan as we speak. Someone tried to kill me, and Oliver saved my life, but now he's disappeared. I think the Williams family is involved. Be careful, Esther, and trust no one. The situation there is far more complicated than it seems." "I will, but Oliver risked his life to save me. I owe him this. If Xavier is there too, all the more reason." When the plane finally touched down in New York City, Jonathan and Nancy took a moment to appreciate the crisp spring air. The bustling modern city, a stark contrast from Havana, greeted them with its familiar vibrancy. Dorian's eyes went wide as he took it all in. "It's even better than I imagined." Jonathan smirked at Dorian's childlike joy. "Different worlds, Dorian. Let's get you some cash and then you can explore on your own." "What? You don't want to show your own cousin around your hometown?" Jonathan fixed him with a sharp gaze and pulled Nancy close. "I told you we have things to do. We'll set you up with a place to stay, but that's all we can offer." Dorian raised his hands in mock surrender. All right. Maybe Norman will give me a tour." Norman responded with a smirk. "Got my own plans. Just don't fall on the subway tracks and you'll be fine." A few hours later, Esther and Dan touched down in Cuba. As they rode from the airport to the Williams residence, Esther looked out the car window, the unfamiliar landscape stretching out before her. Despite her last name, Esther knew that she couldn't count on the Williams family to protect her. And for that matter, she wanted nothing to do with the people who had so sadistically hunted down Nancy and Jonathan's families. She glanced at Dan with concern. "Why does it feel like we're driving to our own funeral?" "I won't let that happen, Esther. This family needs me and Oliver, and as long as we're around, you'll be safe." Esther smirked. "Oh yeah? You're gonna fight your cousins for me? Wow. You offer a girl your undying support and she mocks your disability. Super classy, sis." They nudged each other playfully, briefly escaping the somber mood until the car slowed to a halt. The imposing gates of the Williams family estate loomed ahead, and as they eased open to let them through, she took Dan's hand and squeezed it tight. "Whatever happens in there, you're not alone." To Esther's surprise, the house staff greeted them with enthusiasm, showing them a pair of immaculately made-up suits. With Arthur in a nursing home and Oliver's fate unknown, the house felt eerily quiet, and her unease was quickly compounded when she heard a soft knock on the door and a maid entered with a nervous expression. "Miss Esther, 2 guests from the Sloan family are here to see you." Esther's heart pounded. The Sloan family? How did they even know she was there? Doing her best to mask her anxiety, she followed the maid into the nearby sitting room. But as her eyes scanned the couches in front of her, she suddenly froze. Her visitors were none other than Gavin and Xavier. Scrambling to control her emotions, she offered a polite nod. "Xavier, it's good to see you. How are you feeling?" Xavier looked her up and down before his aloof voice broke the tension. "And who might you be?" "Esther, do you remember me? From New York City?" He paused for a beat, then nodded. Yes, my friend Jonathan mentioned you. Do you know him well?" Esther resisted the urge to roll her eyes. Xavier's performance was clear as day to her, but he had evidently fooled the others. What she couldn't figure out was why he was doing it. Was it to gather information? To make himself seem like less of a threat? As her mind reeled with the possibilities, Gavin stood and stepped toward her. With the air of authority, he introduced himself. "Allow me the pleasure, Miss Williams. I'm Gavin, Xavier's older cousin. Admittedly, I was hoping to see your uncle, but when I heard you'd arrived, I couldn't resist. Esther studied his face, seeking any hint of his intentions. Was he aware of the leadership vacuum in the Williams family? And what was his relationship with Xavier? She extended her hand and gripped Gavin's firmly. Nice to meet you, Gavin. I apologize that my uncle wasn't here to greet you, but you understand. Business calls. Naturally. And speaking of absent friends, where is Oliver these days? I'm surprised to see both him and Arthur out of town simultaneously. Must be quite the emergency. Your concern is truly touching, but rest assured, it's a mere coincidence. Gavin's intentions suddenly clicked into focus. This was no mere social call. He had come to probe for weaknesses. She had no idea of knowing what information he already had, but it was clear that the Williams family was in an extremely vulnerable place. She had to assume Gavin knew and tread carefully. She tilted her head playfully. I have to say, I'm beginning to feel offended, Gavin. You ask about my uncle, and now my brother. A lesser woman might worry she's not enough for you. Gavin's face split into a broad smile. On the contrary, I'd far rather speak to you than those grumpy men you call family. And as luck would have it, I have something here that I think you'll find interesting. As he spoke, he carefully extracted a sealed letter from his coat pocket. Esther narrowed her eyes with apprehension as he broke the seal and slid a yellowed piece of paper from within. Accepting the parchment from him, she immediately noticed the firm, stylized penmanship of a handwritten contract. It was signed at the bottom by Arthur and Gavin's father. What does this have to do with me? A soft smile crept slowly across his mouth. I think it's best if you read it yourself. Don't worry, I'll wait. Esther's fingers delicately flattened out the paper, but as she read the words before her, her expression contorted with disbelief. It was a marital agreement, promising that the eldest family of the Williams family, that meant Esther, would marry the oldest son from the Sloane family. That meant Gavin. She looked sharply at Gavin, her blue eyes attempting to pierce his smug demeanor. But he met her gaze with a suggestive wink. It seems destiny brought me to your door, Esther. Xavier here can attest to his authenticity. My grandfather gave it to me this morning. Esther noticed Xavier's hand involuntarily clench as she passed the contract back to Gavin with a laugh. I admire our relative's desire for solidarity. But you'll notice that the contract is missing a pretty important signature. Mine. Gavin feigned heartbreak, clutching his chest dramatically. Miss Williams, do you spurn the union of our illustrious families? Together we could usher in an entirely new era of prosperity. I grew up in Texas, Gavin. I'm afraid your traditions don't hold much interest to me. The only thing I'm here to do is escort Dan to meet his father. Gavin glanced over his shoulder at Xavier. It seems your friend doesn't have the same affection for me as she does for you. Advocate on my behalf? Her choices are her own. I won't intercede. Esther smirked. Sounds like the jury is in, Gavin. Don't worry. I'm sure you'll find another wonderful girl to trap with your little contract. Gavin sighed and returned the contract to its envelope. But when he looked back up at Esther, the playful glint had left his eyes. I'm sorry you feel that way, Miss Williams, but as you may have noticed, you're not in Texas anymore. So let's cut the crap, shall we? We know Arthur isn't out on business, and we have it on good authority that Oliver is out of the picture too. We're taking your empire whether you like it or not. The question is, are we doing it the easy way or the hard way? Before Esther could respond to Gavin's threat, she heard a booming laugh from the hallway. A flurry of servants made way, and a loud series of footsteps announced another unexpected visitor. He strode up next to Gavin and put his arm around him. My God, son, you really do have a flair for the dramatic. And might I add, that's hardly the way to talk to a woman you hope to marry. He turned to Esther with a winning smile. Please, accept my apologies on Gavin's behalf. He was clearly overwhelmed by your beauty. I'm Carter Sloane, his and Xavier's grandfather. To what do we owe the pleasure? Carter took his arm from around Gavin and leaned on his cane, sighing. First, let me say that your uncle was a very impressive man, and I'm heartbroken at his circumstances. Despite my nephew's enthusiasm, we don't see this as a takeover. Arthur and I had imagined a more solid union between our families for decades, and this merely seems like the ideal opportunity for everyone. It would allow the Williams family to maintain complete control over their assets and set us all up for a prosperous future. Besides, they say weddings can work miracles. Perhaps a union might be just the medicine your uncle needs. Esther sneered inwardly at the idea of helping the man who had hunted down her best friend's family and had them brutally murdered. But Oliver's was another story. She had to believe he was still alive somewhere, and she wasn't about to throw away his birthright before he even had a chance to inherit it. Feeling the weight of the room's gaze, Esther stepped forward, locking eyes with Carter. As Gavin so crudely reminded everyone, I'm new to your little world. So please, enlighten me on how these arrangements play out. Carter scrutinized Esther momentarily, but when he finally spoke, he maintained his air of familiarity. We're not brutes, Esther. Believe it or not, your uncle spoke of you often. He thought you were a perfect match for my nephew Gavin, and having met you, I have to say I agree. On what grounds? I barely met him 5 minutes ago. Carter chuckled, turning his gaze to Gavin. I told him to take it slow and get to know you first, but he comes by his headstrong nature honestly. Gavin cleared his throat, his face exuding innocence. Please, let me apologize. The truth is, I was just nervous. Your reputation precedes you, Esther. Esther suppressed a smirk. The performance was cringeworthy, and even Carter seemed to agree, waving dismissively at Gavin as his gaze settled on Esther again. We see these arrangements as business contracts. They've provided us with generations of wealth and stability, and we enter into them with full knowledge and clarity. When I say you seem like a perfect match, it's a reflection of your strategic temperaments, nothing more. Reaching into his coat pocket, Carter retrieved a document, holding it out for emphasis. To show you how serious we are, please take this as a token of our commitment. Before Esther could respond, Dan suddenly appeared next to her, placing his hand on her shoulder. His tone was a mix of defiance and disdain. Mr. Sloane, if you've always desired a union with the Williams family, then you should know that Esther is a member by name only. Her father was adopted. Surely that's not what you had in mind. On the contrary, I think Esther is exceptional. Adoption or not, she is part of the family. And I know for a fact that your father would agree. Dan clenched his fists, and Esther quickly interjected to diffuse the tension. For the sake of argument, let's say I'm willing to entertain the idea of an engagement. Xavier let out a loud cough in an attempt to cover up his stunned reaction. Esther locked eyes with him and flashed a knowing smile before returning to Carter. But if what you desire is a long-lasting union between our families, then shouldn't we wait until you've chosen your successor? Carter let out a hearty laugh, his voice full of surprise. Esther, you truly are a breath of fresh air. What would you propose, then? Esther, always the diplomat, replied playfully. If I say I'll marry whoever succeeds you, wouldn't that make me sound mercenary? You'd have my grandsons at each other's throats. I'm sure they respect you enough to accept whatever decision you make. I'll admit, I've always believed that a little competition brings out the best in all of us. He turned to Gavin. What do you say? Is it worth fighting for? You raised me to be the man I am today. I won't lay you down. Carter nodded and turned his attention to Xavier. What about you? Are you up to the challenge? All eyes turned to Xavier, but he looked directly at Esther. She had thrown the gauntlet on his behalf, and all he had to do now was stand up and accept it. With unwavering conviction, he turned to Carter. The blood of the Sloane family courses through my veins. I've never shied away from a fight, and I don't intend to start now. I admire you, Xavier. Even if your past is a blank page, your future should be written in bold strokes. The Sloan legacy was built on that kind of resilience. Carter then turned to Esther. My dear, I owe you a debt of gratitude for rekindling their fire. You're even more impressive than your uncle described. Lunch that afternoon was a grand affair, and by the time Carter, Gavin, and Xavier departed, the mood had improved considerably. One person, however, remained skeptical. As soon as they were alone, Dan took Esther by the arm, his voice laden with concern. Esther, are you seriously considering marrying one of them? Don't worry, I'm just buying time. There's no way this tussle is going to wrap up overnight. And I have no intention of spending the rest of my life cooped up in a remote compound like this. By the time the dust settles on all of this, your brother will be back, and it will all be moot. If I hadn't played along in the meantime, who knows how much damage they would have done? The mention of Oliver seemed to throw Dan into a spiral, so Esther nudged him gently. I know you're worried about him. I am too. But we both know how strong he is. Whatever is going on, we have to trust that he'll find his way back to us. But what if he doesn't, Esther? You said he'll be back before this mess is sorted out. But we don't even know for a fact that he's still alive. I don't like thinking about that any more than you do. But I refuse to stand by and watch you get trapped in a marriage you don't want, with a family you owe nothing to. Esther met his gaze, the gravity of the situation weighing on her. I hate your father as much as you do, and I have no love for what he's built here. But we owe it to Oliver to try. It's his fight, and like it or not, that means we're a part of it. Dan clasped her hand, his voice choked. That's all the more reason I can't keep living like this. You're out there fighting for us, for our family, while I sit here uselessly. It's like I'm a ghost and the world moves around me. Esther's voice wavered. But the surgery you're talking about, its success rate is low. I don't care, Esther. All I care about is being able to protect the people I love. And we both know that these people will never take me seriously the way I am now. If I'm ever going to stand side by side with you in this battle, I need my sight. And we both know it. Esther's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Having known the despair of blindness herself, she felt Dan's pain keenly. Taking a shaky breath, she conceded. All right, Dan. I understand. I'll arrange for the surgery as soon as possible. Thank you, Dan whispered, the weight of his decision evident in his voice. When I come out on the other side, I promise to make you and Oliver proud. With a few brief phone calls, Esther was able to schedule the procedure for the following day. She stayed by Dan's side until the moment he was wheeled into the operating theater, and as the door swung shut behind him, he smiled in her direction and gave a playful wink. Relax, sis. If I survive 10 years of Hollywood auditions, I can survive anything. Back in New York City, Nancy started another early morning at Brightstar headquarters in preparation for the launch of their first multi-platform video game. Since returning from Cuba, she'd only left her office to eat and sleep, sometimes not even then. And as she sipped her coffee and looked out at the sunrise, she reflected on the vital crossroads that lay ahead. The game was her first true venture since taking over Brightstar, and she diverted every asset the company controlled toward making it a success. She'd taken out loans to fund the fastest possible development, and had even reassigned her research team from the autonomous car division at the Davis Group. But it was a risk she was willing to take. She refused to be another face in the crowd or to rely solely on Jonathan. He had his own commitments, leaving Nancy to pour her heart and soul into Brightstar. It was a labor of love, and if everything went according to plan, it would be her first signpost on her path toward unprecedented success. Just then, her reverie was broken by a discreet cough behind her. Glancing back, she saw one of her hardest-working coders, Alex, hesitating at her door. Miss Miller? Alex began nervously. This might sound silly, but I saw something odd yesterday and felt like I should tell you." Nancy gestured for him to continue. "I was using the bathroom late last night, and I think that janitor didn't know I was in there, because he came in the bathroom and I saw him shuffle through a big stack of files, take a bunch of pictures, and then hurry out. Then, when I saw him again this morning, his expression seemed off." Nancy's eyes sharpened. "What time?" "Around 10. Do you think I'm overreacting?" Nancy gave a reassuring smile. "Not at all. You should always trust your instincts. Worst case scenario? It's a simple misunderstanding. Thank you for bringing it to my attention." Nancy immediately dug into the surveillance footage from the night before, and her jaw dropped as she discovered the entire day's footage had been deleted. Whatever Alex had seen, it clearly indicated foul play. And with a pivotal moment in the company's future coming in less than 24 hours, Nancy had every reason to believe the timing wasn't a coincidence. Nancy was on high alert when she arrived at her launch event the following morning. With so little time to investigate, she hadn't been able to uncover the reason for the missing surveillance footage. But she knew she'd have to be ready for anything. She even considered postponing the event, but she feared the damage to her company's reputation would be permanent. As she waited backstage for the event to begin, the sound of chatter filled the air, and the host stepped up next to her. "Excited, Miss Miller?" "Let's just say I'll be glad when it's done." "Don't worry. I'm sure it will go perfectly." With that, the host stepped on stage and the crowd roared with excitement. Waiting for the noise to settle, she gave a brief description of the company and its CEO, before finally inviting Maria to join her. Maria assumed the podium at center stage and gazed out at the audience with a beaming smile. "Let's get right to it, shall we? Our team has been working day and night to bring you this incredible game. And every minute I spend talking is another minute you could have spent enjoying their masterpiece. And I know you will." The crowd cheered again, and Nancy waved in appreciation. A 10-second countdown clock appeared on the screen behind her. But just as she was about to start the countdown, she noticed a staff member darting toward her with a worried expression. Nancy leaned over as her assistant whispered frantically in her ear. Her eyes going wide with concern, she flashed the audience a smile and charged backstage. Meanwhile, back at the Davidson house in Cuba, Theo's wife Claire sat alongside Matthew, watching a live stream of the event. A sly smile played out on her lips as she saw Maria's assistant hustle on stage. And she glanced down at her phone to read a message she'd just received. "Everything is set. We just brought down all of Brightstar's servers. They'll be forced to cancel." Quietly putting her phone away, Claire put on a look of concern and glanced at Matthew as he furrowed his brow. "Something seems off, doesn't it? I'm a little worried for Maria." "We're certainly about to see what she's worth." "I wonder if Jonathan knows how badly it's going. Do you think he regrets giving her so much freedom?" Matthew was about to respond when they saw Maria hustle back on stage. She sported the same effortless smile as before, but Claire knew better. After all, she had orchestrated the entire thing, including Matthew's viewing, to do maximum damage to Maria's reputation. The worse she looked, the more embarrassing her failure, the more likely Matthew was to question Jonathan's judgment. Then, it was only a matter of time until he anointed Theo as his heir. She watched with giddy anticipation as Maria stepped back up to the podium, but to her shock, she didn't announce a problem. She started the countdown. Doubt slowly crept into the back of Claire's mind as the clock reached 6 and the audience shouted along with it. What was Maria up to? Could she possibly have fixed the server crash that quickly? Her eyes grew wider, yet as the countdown reached 0, the massive screens behind Maria lit up with a massive display. On one side was a download counter, and on the other side was a live feed of various screens within the world of the game. To Claire's horror, the download counter immediately took off, and Nancy took the microphone with confidence. Sorry about my brief exit earlier. Believe it or not, I realized I'd forgotten to put myself on the wait list for a download. You'd think being CEO would give me a head start. But that's not how we work at Brightstar. We're all about you, and I'm in line just like everyone else." Her tone was playful, and the audience, including Matthew, immediately seemed satisfied with her explanation. Claire glanced back at the download counter and could hardly believe her eyes. Over 3 million in less than a minute. Maria had clearly avoided her first trap, but Claire was no fool. She had contingency plans. Rolling her eyes, she let out a forced chuckle and turned back to Matthew. "I have to admit, this all just seems so frivolous to me. Who would want to run a video game company when there's serious work to be done?" Matthew shrugged, and his eyes stayed glued to Maria. "I don't care about games, but I do care about money, and anything that attracts this many people is worth money." Claire flinched at his words, eyes downcast. "Still, you'd never catch Theo wasting his time with a video game." As the event continued, Claire's phone buzzed again, and she quickly read the message. "Not sure how she rerouted all that traffic, but mark my words, she's going down. Just sit tight and enjoy the show." Swallowing her unease, Claire went to pour herself a drink as Maria's download counter passed the 10 million mark. She downed the wine in one gulp and sat back down just in time for the host to take the microphone back while Maria strolled backstage. "Now I know all of you are having fun with the game, but how would you feel if we brought out a few special guests to celebrate with us?" The crowd quickly whipped itself into a frenzy, shouting the names of the celebrities that Brightstar had featured in their promotional materials. What they didn't know, and what the host clearly didn't either, was that Claire had intercepted them and offered to pay double for them not to attend. Brightstar was about to be stood up by 3 of the biggest celebrities in America. Gesturing backstage, the host welcomed them with a radiant grin, only to be met with silence. She called on them again, but again, no one emerged from the curtain. A nervous smile broke out across the host's face, and a moment later, another assistant came running on stage. As she whispered into the host's ear, a ripple of confusion shot through the crowd. Then, to Claire's delight, she heard impatient voices rise from the audience. "Where are they? You promised they'd be here." "I camped overnight just for this?" The murmurs grew louder, and Claire could barely hold back a devious grin. As the live feed began to devolve into chaos, she heard Matthew scoff from beside her and glance over to see his face contorted in anger. "I can't believe I gave Jonathan the benefit of the doubt when he said she had business acumen. If this is how she runs things, he'll be lucky if she doesn't bankrupt them both." Matthew picked up the remote as if to change the channel, but briefly paused as Maria snatched the microphone and walked to the edge of the stage. Seeing her confidence, a hole opened in Claire's stomach. Was it possible Maria had bested her again? From the very edge of the stage, Nancy looked out over the crowd. She'd barely been able to hold the event together so far, but the angry faces staring back at her only deepened her resolve. Someone was clearly attempting to sabotage her, and she refused to let them win. Raising a hand to ask for silence, she finally spoke. "I know you all are wondering why our special guests didn't show. Well, I was too." She smirked, and to her surprise, the crowd laughed. It turned out that all 3 of them canceled their contracts just before the event started. Pretty classy, right? But don't worry, because we've got someone even better in store. Curious? She paused, soaking in the audience's anticipation. Anyone who's truly a part of this community, who really understands what we're trying to do at Brightstar, will know the name of the man who's about to join me on stage. He holds world records in countless video games, and he's founded the most famous gaming website, Night Terrors. Suddenly, a wave of gasps spread across the crowd. Anyone plugged into the gaming world knew the name Night Terror. He was gaming royalty. but he had vanished from the scene 5 years earlier and never reappeared since. "Is Night Terror here?" an ardent fan cried out. "He's the ultimate legend," another added. Milking the moment, Nancy turned toward the side of the stage, gesturing dramatically as the curtain rose to reveal a man dressed in torn jeans, sunglasses, and a black sweatshirt with a hood up. It was Peter, aka Night Terror. Recognizing him, the crowd erupted into sheer pandemonium. The celebrity's absence was instantaneously forgotten, and even new gamers, initially lured by the star factor, found themselves swayed by the group's energy. Nancy breathed a sigh of relief as her gambit paid off. She had found out minutes earlier that the celebrities were running late, but Nancy sensed foul play. The PR team scrambled to find a replacement, but Nancy had a different idea. Dragging Peter into a quiet room, she confronted him. "The company's in a jam, Peter. What do you say? Could Night Terror come out of retirement for one more appearance?" Clearly not thrilled, Peter replied with a half-hearted smile. "I'm not sure what you're getting at, boss." Nancy smirked. "You remember those pictures Amanda took of you drooling on your desk during an afternoon nap? One word from me, and they hit Twitter." "Damn. Amanda did what now?" Peter glared playfully at Nancy. All right. What's the plan?" "Just dust off your hoodie and sunglasses and give the audience a match they won't forget. Then, you can hang it up for good. Plus, I'll delete the photos." Peter had initially hesitated to bring back his infamous persona, but as he stood before his frenzied fans, he felt a rush that he hadn't experienced for years. He took a deep breath, signaling for silence. "I won't bore you with a speech about the glory days. We're here to play. So anyone who thinks they've got what it takes to beat Night Terror, I'll see you in the game." The crowd immediately began chanting his name, and Peter grinned. "Enough talk. Let's rumble." The tech crew quickly set up, linking the display to Peter's console for the audience to watch. With the entire crowd glued to the monitors and watching Peter's every move, Nancy observed from the sidelines, her lips curving into a satisfied smile. She might have been clueless about gaming, but life was the ultimate game. Every challenge, every foe, every hurdle was a new level to conquer. She'd faced monsters more terrible than any game designer could come up with, and every time she had emerged stronger. She might not have had the time to master those virtual worlds as well as Peter, but on life's grand stage, she was a seasoned pro. And losing? That just wasn't in her vocabulary. Thousands of miles away at the Sloan compound in Havana Bay, Mackenzie's face twisted with fury as she watched Maria overcome yet another obstacle with ease. She and Claire had devised a plan so thorough it never crossed her mind Maria might outsmart them. But here she was, looking more capable than ever. Nonetheless, she and Claire still had one trick up their sleeve. She pulled out her phone and dashed off a message. "Don't worry, having Night Terror in the building was dumb luck. We'll still come out on top." Receiving the message, Theo's wife stared in disbelief. Considering how effortlessly Maria had responded so far, she was losing confidence that the rest of the plan would hold water. Glancing at Matthew, she noticed a look of deep admiration on his face. The realization hit her hard. If Theo caught wind of her and Mackenzie's failure, he'd berate her endlessly. Desperate to distract Matthew, she tried to intervene. "I'm getting bored of this, aren't you? Why don't we watch something more interesting?" But Matthew, entranced by the screen, dismissed her. "Do what you need to do. I'm fine right here." Back on stage in New York, Peter's impeccable gameplay made the live feed seem like a high-octane action movie. In no time, a clip of his performance went viral, and news of his return to gaming swept the internet. When the match finally ended with his resounding victory, The electric atmosphere left everyone pulsing with adrenaline. Peter rose gracefully and addressed the crowd. Well, you gave it your best shot, but it looks like Night Terror is still the best. Keep practicing, and I'll catch you all in game. As Peter made his exit, a player shouted with enthusiasm. Does this mean you're back for good? You're damn right it does. After all, I'm the real brains at Brightstar. He winked playfully at Nancy as gasps rose from the audience. She stepped forward and silenced the room with her commanding presence. A big shout out to Night Terror for that electrifying showcase. This game wouldn't exist without him. With a final wave, Peter made his way off stage and Nancy paused, looking over the crowd with gravitas. Before we move on to our next event, I'd like to share something with all of you. If there is one thing I can't stand in this world, it's dishonesty. The crowd grumbled and glanced at each other, unsure of where she was headed, but she didn't flinch. While we were enjoying Night Terror's exhibition, I learned that our so-called special guests were actually never intending on being here. They signed the contracts in bad faith and were paid to do so by someone hoping to do us harm. Not only did they go back on their word, but by taking the money in the process, they showed us who they really are. Two-faced vultures. These three celebrities value a few extra dollars over the time and money of the fans who are responsible for their careers. They disrespected me, but more importantly, they disrespected you. And I'm here to say that Brightstar won't stand for it. We'll pursue legal action against all three, and any damages recovered will be passed on to everyone who bought a ticket to this event. Nancy held up her left hand, a glint from her wedding ring catching the light. Furthermore, my husband, Jonathan Davis, has assured me that all three will be fired from their lucrative contracts with the Davis Group. At the sound of her announcement, the cavernous room fell silent. Moments earlier, she had appeared like a playful young woman enjoying the moment. But her steely resolve in the face of adversity projected a whole new image of authority and leadership. Photographers feverishly captured the moment, while journalists raced to break the story first. After a beat, the audience erupted in applause. Before long, support for Nancy began pouring in from all corners of the internet. Subscriber counts for the celebrities plummeted, and companies lined up to blacklist them. Capitalizing on the moment, Nancy had her team pull up a live feed of the Twitter posts using the hashtag #StandWithBrightstar. The first tweet to appear came from none other than Steve Davis. As the VP and second largest shareholder of the Davis Group, I'll never work with them again, and I encourage others to do the same. Then came a message of support from Jonathan. As the CEO and primary shareholder of the Davis Group, I fully endorse Maria's statement. And by the way, congrats to my beautiful wife and her incredible team at Brightstar. I can't wait to try out the new game. Finally, Esther chimed in. As chief perfumer at Unique, I partner with artists of integrity, and Maria is one of them. Satisfied with the response to her announcement, Nancy moved on to the final event of the night. As you all know, we still have one thing left to do. Choose one of you to take home an incredibly special prize. And I can promise there won't be any surprises here because I designed and built it myself. Our lucky winner will not only get a one-on-one gaming session with Night Terror, but they'll also receive a smartphone from the Davis Group's unreleased lineup. It's no ordinary smartphone, though. It's a smart robot with a powerful AI interface that will render all of your other technology obsolete. Say goodbye to messy calendars, confusing GPS interfaces, and tiny keyboards, and say hello to the future. She held up a small, endearing robot and turned it on for the whole crowd to see. The robot's eyes lit up with life, and it gave a charming wave. Hello, Maria. Is it time for me to find my new owner? It sure is. Now, who wants to be the first one with this historic piece of technology? The crowd began to cheer, but a wave of surprise overtook them as a loud, dissenting voice rang out. I don't, and no one else should either. All eyes turned to an older woman defiantly glaring at Nancy on stage. "I didn't come here to celebrate your little game. And I sure as hell didn't come here to be handed a fancy tracking device that lets the Davis Group know every single thing about me." Nancy narrowed her eyes as her gaze landed on the woman's face. She was all but certain that this was part of the ongoing series of attacks against her. But she still had to take it seriously. "Well then, with all due respect, what brings you here today?" The woman huffed, not breaking eye contact. "I'm here to tell everyone the truth about people like you. You make games that are supposed to entertain kids, but instead, they turn them into drones. My own grandson was a straight-A student until he got hooked on a game just like yours. Now he's failing every class and hardly leaves his bedroom. He used to be a shining light for our family, and now he's a burnout at the age of 13. She pointed an accusing finger at Nancy, and her tone became even more biting. "You, a young lady with wealth and beauty and unlimited opportunity. You're just a drug dealer dressed up in fancy clothes. How can you sleep at night, knowing you profit off the broken souls of this nation's youth?" The venue descended into an uncomfortable hush, the tension palpable. Nancy's mind raced as she listened to the woman's tirade. Study after study had shown that video games were no more problematic than any other medium, but the grandmother's supposed skepticism wasn't just about her. It tapped into a broader concern shared by many parents. If Nancy didn't address it correctly, the online backlash could be brutal. As the silence in the auditorium began to fracture, murmurs spread. Some shot sympathetic glances at Nancy, while others glared resentfully at the older woman. As Nancy watched the audience grow restless, she had to admit that her enemy had chosen the perfect plant in the older woman. The crowd was predisposed to turn on her, and if Nancy didn't quickly take control, it could easily look like she was standing by while a mob of her followers verbally attacked an innocent grandmother. Reporters readied their cameras, turning their focus on Nancy and waiting for her response. With all eyes on her, Nancy gently grasped the microphone and spoke in an earnest tone. "First of all, I'd like to commend you for coming here today. Standing up in front of a crowd of people who disagree with you takes incredible bravery. It's also clear that you love your grandson very much, and I'm sorry to hear about his struggles with school. I want you to know that I've wrestled with all of the concerns you've just voiced, but I would encourage you to dig deeper. Have you ever truly immersed yourself in an online game, or the community that builds up around it?" The woman scoffed. "Of course not. They're violent and depraved. Everywhere I look, people are glued to screens. Why would I want to contribute?" Nancy took a deep breath. "I believe that before we pass judgment on something unfamiliar, we should try to experience it firsthand and base our opinions on reality and facts rather than just rumors and assumptions. Show me one realm of life that's purely good, with no downsides. Our goals should be to understand the risks of our products and strive to amplify the beliefs while minimizing the pitfalls." The woman stammered, suddenly at a loss for words. Sensing the momentum turning in her favor, Nancy suddenly had an idea. Gesturing backstage, she locked eyes with the woman again. "You're concerned about the effect our game might have on young people? Well, let me introduce someone who might shed a different light on this for you. He's the youngest employee at Brightstar, a brilliant student, a gifted game designer, and someone very near to my heart. Henry, if you're still backstage, could you join us?" After a long pause, Henry's head poked out from behind the curtain. His eyes went wide at the sight of the crowd, with all of its attention trained on him, and his gaze quickly shifted to Nancy. He pleaded with his eyes for her to change her mind, but she smiled warmly and stepped toward him. "It's okay, Henry. This game is just as much yours as it is mine, and everyone is excited to hear your story." Then she turned to the crowd. "Isn't that right, folks?" The crowd lit up with warm applause, and Henry slowly emerged from behind the curtain. With a nervous wave, he walked on stage and approached Nancy, who handed him the microphone and gave him a gentle push toward the audience. Swallowing hard, he took a deep breath and began to speak. Henry's heart raced, and his voice cracked with adrenaline as he spoke. Hey folks, I'm Henry. Ever since I was young, video games have been the most important thing in my life. My dad wasn't around much, and when he was, well, let's just say it was nice to have an escape. And video games always provided that. But they're far more than that too. I've always been shy, and I have had a hard time making friends. I'm not good at sports. I'm not comfortable in front of big groups. The crowd chuckled at the irony, and Henry smiled along with them. But none of that matters in video games. I can be anyone I want. And more than that, I have hundreds of friends who I would have never have met any other way. We may not go to the same schools or live in the same states, but we understand each other. Isn't that what friendship is all about? The crowd clapped, and a look of embarrassment began to slowly creep on the angry older woman's face. Finally gaining confidence, Henry continued. Those two things would be more than enough for me to say that games have impacted my life in a positive way. But then Maria gave me the chance to help shape the storylines and design challenges at Brightstar. Now, my knowledge of video games is earning me my first paycheck. I turned my passion into a career before I even got to college. And now every day feels like a new adventure. And as Maria said, life is a coin with two sides. Money can build schools or bombs, depending on the hands in it. Games are the same. They're just tools. It's how we engage with them that counts. Henry paused, inhaling deeply. Anyway, that's my story. And for all the players here, I'll see you in the game. With that, Nancy put her arm around him and took the microphone back with a reassuring smile. Thank you for that, Henry. I'm sure you're not the only one here who feels that way. And ma'am, as for your grandson, I encourage you to bring him to our headquarters sometime to talk to our engineers. They're brilliant and extremely hardworking, and I have a hunch they might be able to inspire him just like they have Henry. Finally, she gestured to the entire crowd. And to all the gamers out there, let's make a pact. I'll set up a special forum in the game, and any player that shows me straight A's or an improved report card will get a special prize. The room erupted with enthusiasm, and Nancy saw her opportunity to bring the tumultuous event to a close. Calling Peter back on stage alongside her and Henry, she waved goodbye and offered her appreciation to the crowd. In the Hilltop Davidson compound outside Havana, Matthew could hardly believe what he had just witnessed. Though he initially attributed the sloppiness of the event to Maria's incompetence, it became clear to him by the end that someone was out to get her. Nonetheless, she had risen to every challenge with grace and dignity. The more they threw at her, the brighter she seemed to shine. As he leaned back in his chair, he had to admit that any lingering skepticism he had about her had evaporated. And the same applied to Jonathan. Not only did he accurately identify how special she was, his support for her was unwavering. His eyes narrowed in thought, and as he rose to his feet, he signaled for his assistant to join him in the study. From the other side of the room, Claire watched Matthew's retreating form, and a roiling storm of frustration welled up inside her. How had Maria managed to not only get through the event unscathed, but somehow coming out looking stronger? Reeling from the totality of her and Mackenzie's failure, her anger was suddenly interrupted by a phone call. It was her husband, Theo. She did her best to summon a rosy tone. Hi, baby. How are you? Where are you? Theo snapped. Home. Working in the garden. Why? Theo let out an icy chuckle. Sure about that? Because I heard you were watching TV with my uncle. A knot of dread tightened in Claire's stomach. Someone must have tipped him off. We just wrapped up, she stammered. Theo's exasperation was palpable. Cut the crap, Claire. I know it was you. And let me guess, you got the Sloan girl involved too. Theo, honey, it's just trying to help. Well, you didn't. And if you had bothered to talk to me about it first, I would have told you not to. Swear to God, Claire. All you do is drag me down. I never expected you to be my business partner. But when I agreed to this marriage, I thought you would at least be a steady presence. My uncle isn't stupid. He's going to know that one of us is responsible, and that's going to make Jonathan look even better. Realize how stupid you've made us look? I think you're overstating things. Besides, even if she managed to hold it together, still a mess. Theo shot back at her with a mocking tone. You really don't get it, do you? What happens doesn't matter. It's how you respond. If you were in that spotlight, could you have even come close to her performance? Claire swallowed hard, finding no words. I'm sorry, Theo. Save it for when Matthew announces Jonathan as a successor. With a cold finality, Theo ended the call. With the event finally concluded, Nancy retreated to her private dressing room backstage and let out a huge sigh. She could hardly believe she had gone through it, but she felt confident that her performance had restored faith in Brightstar. As she pondered her next move, she suddenly received a call from Jonathan. Hey, love. You finally done over there? He inquired. Finally. Did you catch any of it? Someone is clearly trying to mess with me. It was one disaster after another. You're a force, Maria. Your enemies never stood a chance. And when we figure out who's responsible, we'll take them down together. Nancy smiled to herself. You're something else, you know that? Soon enough, people are going to start referring to me as the Brightstar's CEO's husband. Nancy laughed. So when's my house husband coming back to New York? Things went well today, so we should be able to wrap up and sign the deal tomorrow. If everything goes according to plan, you'll be wrapped in my arms in less than 2 days. You better do more than wrap me up, Nancy replied suggestively. Jonathan's voice dropped to a sultry growl. Be careful what you wish for. After the call, Nancy's smile lingered and she felt a warm flutter in her chest. But her reverie was abruptly broken when she got another call, this time from Esther. Hey girl, thanks for the support online earlier. Did you see the whole thing? Nancy beamed with satisfaction, but when she heard Esther's quivering sobs, she suddenly realized something was terribly wrong. Esther, what's wrong? Where are you? It's Dan. He didn't make it, Nancy. The surgery failed. He's dead. Nancy's heart sank, her voice barely above a whisper. How could this have happened? The odds were always against him, but he insisted. He said it was the only way for him to protect his family, and I let him go through with it. Esther, you can't blame yourself. It's a horrible tragedy, but it isn't your fault. You were only trying to support your brother. I just can't believe he's gone. He was always so full of life. And with Oliver disappearing too, I feel so lost. Before Nancy could respond, she heard Esther gasp through her phone, her voice cracking with emotion. Oh my God, they're bringing him out. I have to go. When Esther hung up, Nancy found herself staring at her phone in disbelief. Dan had been such a cherished friend during her and Esther's childhoods, always alongside them while Stark and Oliver remained distant and aloof. Then, as an adult, he made the difficult choice to pursue his passion over money. He had thrown half of his life into his craft as an actor, and just as he seemed to be able to reach his goals, he was struck down in his prime. Nancy could hardly believe how cruel fate had been to him. The universe seemed to have a cruel script in place, and Dan's was simply the most recent innocent life to pay the price. Sliding her phone into her pocket, Esther looked down at the white sheet covering her brother's body, and a fresh round of tears rolled down her face. Slowly peeling the sheet back, she gazed at Dan's peaceful face one final time. Kissing his forehead, she could feel his warmth draining away for the final time. She pulled the sheet back over him and slumped into a chair, tears slipping through her fingers as she cradled her face in her hands. Desperate for support, she tried calling Oliver, but her calls remained stubbornly unanswered. Later that evening, Dan was cremated. His remains were placed in an elegant blue and white urn, and Esther decided she'd take his ashes to Hollywood and Houston to spread them in the places that were most important to him. But as she began to make her way out of the hospital, a thought suddenly crossed her mind. The man who bore ultimate responsibility for Dan's fate was in the same hospital, resting peacefully. Her blood suddenly boiling, Esther stormed back into the hospital and demanded the room number for Dan's father and the patriarch of the Williams family, Arthur. As she approached his bedside, she could hardly reconcile his weakened appearance with the man who had wrought so much violence on the lives of the people she loved. Gazing at him, she could barely contain her emotions. "Your son is dead," she began, her voice cold, but there was no response. "Your son is dead, and your actions played a direct part." Arthur continued to lie still, but a subtle change in his heartbeat caught Esther's attention. Was it possible that he could hear her? She narrowed her eyes and leaned toward him, her voice dripping with contempt. "Tell me, Arthur, was it worth it? Your pointless vendetta, spanning so many years and so many innocent lives? Was it worth the price you've paid?" She let out a dark, ironic laugh. "Do you even know how Dan died? A failed surgery. All those years ago, you destroyed the Johnson family and took Edward's life. Your choices back then sabotaged any chance Dan had at survival. Had Edward been the surgeon, Dan would likely have survived. At every turn, you made my brother's death more likely. He didn't fall victim to mere fate. The blame lies squarely with you. And you call yourself his father. Huh. You never showed an ounce of love for him, and he died hating you for it. He never forgave you, and neither will I." As Esther's words sank in, a sudden movement caught her attention. In an instant, Arthur's comatose eyes shot open. The machines monitoring him screamed in alarm as his heart raced and his blood pressure surged. Before Esther could even process what had happened, he jerked his head toward her, and they locked eyes.